All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready to dive in. Today we're tackling Bill Ackman.
Ackman.
Yeah, this one's going to be interesting. I mean, we're talking a billionaire hedge fund manager, a philanthropist, and someone who seems to, well, like a good controversy every now and then.
Yeah, he definitely keeps things lively. And that's what I think makes these deep dives so interesting. Even when you think you know someone like Ackman, someone who's often in the headlines, there's always more to uncover.
Yeah.
Those hidden depths and surprising connections.
Right. And we've got his Wikipedia article fired up as our guide for today. So for anyone who needs a quick intro, we're talking about the Bill Ackman, the founder and CEO of Pershing Square Capital Management. So yeah, we're talking billions of dollars, big power moves. You get the picture.
But it's important to remember, he didn't just appear on Wall Street one day with, a magic wand and a pile of cash. Ackman's story starts back in 1966, Chappaqua, New York. Pretty normal upbringing, actually.
Yeah.
And his path to finance, well, it followed a pretty traditional route too. Harvard undergrad, Harvard MBA. But that's kind of where typical ends with Ackman. His career is anything but.
Okay, so we've got a Harvard MBA. Could have taken the easy route, right? Landed a cushy corporate job, climbed the ladder. But that's not Ackman. Instead, he jumps headfirst into the world of hedge funds. Starts Gotham Partners in the early 90s. And get this, even back then, he was already making waves with this bold, contrarian investing style.
Absolutely. This wasn't about following the crowd or playing it safe. Ackman was already showing a knack for going against the grain, and you can see that really clearly with his strategy involving MBIA, a financial services company. Now, this was during a time when most investors viewed MBI as basically untouchable, rock solid, with their AAA bond rating.
But Ackman, he smelled something off.
Right. It wasn't just a gut feeling, though. And this is what always gets me about Ackman, his absolute dedication to research. I mean, we're talking legendary levels here. The guy reportedly spends a fortune, his own money, just photocopying, get this, hundreds of thousands of pages of MBIA's financial statements. I mean, who does that? Ackman does.
And that right there is crucial to understanding how Ackman operates. He's not just throwing darts at a board or making lucky guesses. Ackman digs deep, and I mean deep. He's often uncovering vulnerabilities that other people miss or, frankly, are just afraid to acknowledge. And in the case of MBIA, well, he saw the cracks forming in the housing market way before most people even knew they were there.
So picture this. Everyone else is piling into the housing boom thinking it's going to last forever, right? But Ackman, he's going the opposite direction. He's essentially betting against the entire housing market. And for those who aren't finance people, he used a technique called short selling to do this, basically meaning he'd profit if MBIA stock went down. Risky move, to say the least. Incredibly risky. But then, 2008 hits. The financial crisis explodes. The housing bubble bursts. And that risk that Ackman took, it turns into a massive, and I mean massive, payday. He made a fortune, solidifying this image of him as this maverick investor, the guy who's not afraid to challenge everyone else and win big while doing it.
Talk about a power move. But here's the thing, right? It's not all about the money with Ackman. He's also a signatory of the Giving Pledge, which, for anyone who's not familiar, is basically a commitment by some of the wealthiest individuals and families in the world to dedicate the majority of their wealth to philanthropy.
And it's this kind of thing that makes Ackman so intriguing, right? You have this seemingly contradictory figure on one hand, a ruthless investor who's made billions, often by betting against the system. But on the other hand, he's also pledged to give most of that wealth away.
It definitely adds another layer to his persona, that's for sure. Makes you wonder, what are the forces driving this guy? What does he truly value? Because it's clearly more than just profit. But before we get too deep into analyzing his psyche, let's move on to the next chapter of his career, because this is where things really take off with his firm, Pershing Square Capital Management. With Pershing Square, Ackman doesn't just enter the big leagues, he pretty much takes over. We see even bolder moves, bigger targets, and Ackman becomes like the face of activist investing.
And it's important to be clear about what we mean by activist investing, because it's so central to how Ackman operates. We're not just talking about typical buying and selling of stocks. It's about leveraging that financial stake you have in a company to push for major changes. Could be anything from like shaking up the management team to pushing for a whole company sale.
So it's like you're not just an investor, you're part activist, right? You're using your position to make things happen. And Ackman, he's made some big things happen with Pershing Square.
Oh, absolutely. He became known for these high-stakes proxy fights, basically battles for control of a company's board. And you really see this in action with his fight with Canadian Pacific Railway. Ackman sees All this untapped potential in this railway company that's struggling. So what does he do? Buys up a ton of shares and then launches this very public, very aggressive campaign to replace the entire management team.
And it actually worked. He gets his way, brings in a new CEO, and helps transform Canadian Pacific into this, profit machine. Pretty impressive.
It was a huge win for Ackman and really solidified his reputation as this investor who could spot those undervalued diamonds in the rough and figure out how to unlock their potential. And then he follows that up with some smart investments in big names like Target and Chipotle, which further cements his spot at the top of the hedge fund world.
But let's be real, it's not all sunshine and roses with Ackman. And this brings us to, well, the Herbalife saga, which is like this masterclass in high-stakes financial drama, right? We've got everything. Big accusations, huge personalities clashing, billions of dollars at stake.
Yeah, the Herbalife short is definitely up there as one of the most defining and probably the most controversial chapters in Ackman's career. So he becomes convinced that Herbalife, that multi-level marketing company that sells nutritional supplements, is basically a pyramid scheme taking advantage of people, especially in vulnerable communities.
And he fully commits to this, right? Doesn't just dip his toes in. Ackman takes a massive short position against Herbalife. I mean, we're talking $1 billion here, betting that their stock is going to crash and burn once everyone sees them for what he believes they are.
Oh, and he doesn't keep it quiet either. Ackman goes very public with his accusations, presentations, reports, you name it. He's doing everything he can to convince regulators, investors, the public that Herbalife is built on a foundation of sand.
And that's where things get really good, right? Because now it's not just about numbers and balance sheets anymore. This is where the drama comes in, the big personalities, the feuds. Enter Carl Icahn, another Wall Street heavyweight, who takes the complete opposite side.
Right. And Icahn was already a known rival of Ackman, so he very publicly disagrees with Ackman's take on Herbalife. And what does he do? Starts buying up a ton of Herbalife stock. So now he's directly betting against Ackman's short position. And of course, they're both on CNBC, going at it, questioning each other's motives, calling each other names. It was wild.
Oh, I remember those interviews. It was financial reality TV at its finest.
Totally. It was this battle of egos, just as much as it was about investment strategies. And for Ackman, it ended up being a pretty expensive lesson.
Yeah, after years of fighting it out, Ackman has to admit defeat, closes his short position, and loses a lot of money in the process.
It was a major blow for him, not just financially, but it definitely hurt his reputation too. The Herbalife saga left a lot of people questioning Ackman's judgment, his temperament, and whether his whole activist approach, while it had worked before, could backfire big time, especially when you're up against someone like Carl Icahn.
I mean, that Herbalife thing, that could have been it for some people, right? Like, that big of a loss, the hit to the ego. But not Ackman. He always seems to come back swinging.
He does, doesn't he? And it's not just that he recovers. He kind of doubles down on everything, his convictions, his style. After Herbalife, yeah, he scaled back a bit at Pershing Square, went back to basics, more focused on research, and well, it worked. Big returns in 2019. So he knows how to make a comeback.
Okay, so he's killing it in finance again, but here's where it gets really interesting for me. Ackman gets a lot more vocal, publicly, about social issues, political stuff. And he is not afraid of controversy, not at all. Like that whole thing with the student letter at Harvard, the one condemning Israel.
Right, and that's classic Ackman right there. He doesn't just disagree, he comes out swinging, calling for those students to be blacklisted. Talk about a strong reaction.
And it's like that's his move now, right? We saw it again with Elon Musk defending some of his more interesting statements. Whether you agree with Ackman or not, you got to admit, the guy knows how to make a statement. He stands up for what he believes in, even if, or maybe especially when, it ruffles some feathers.
It's that consistency that's so fascinating about him. We see it throughout his entire career. Shorting a company, those proxy fights, now even these really strong political stances, Ackman doesn't back down. And he puts his money where his mouth is, too literally. Just look at some of his political donations.
Exactly. It's like he sees himself as this champion for what he thinks is right, even if that means going up against huge institutions or, well, everyone else.
Totally.
Yeah.
And this actually brings us to another really interesting aspect of Ackman, the philanthropy. And I don't just mean writing checks. He's super hands-on with his Pershing Square Foundation. Criminal justice reform, fighting poverty, medical research. He's involved in it all.
So it's like, okay, we have this image of this ruthless investor, right? But there's also this whole other side, someone trying to make a real difference in the world. It's a lot more complicated than it seems at first glance.
It always is, right? Easy to forget that these figures, these giants of Wall Street, they have whole lives outside of finance.
Yeah.
And Ackman's marriage to Neri Oxman, she's a brilliant architect, a professor at MIT, that was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a little peek into a different side of him, someone who appreciates art, design, the life of the mind, stuff that's totally separate from balance sheets and hedge funds.
It's a good reminder because we spend all this time digging into these Wikipedia articles, trying to figure these people out. But at the end of the day, they're just people with passions and interests that go way beyond whatever makes the headlines.
Speaking of passions, did you know Ackman's a big-time tennis player?
Mm-hmm.
And not just casual weekend stuff, like seriously competitive. He's even said he could give John McEnroe a run for his money.
Are you serious? That's hilarious. See, that's what I love about these deep dives, these little details that totally change your perspective.
That's the beauty of it. We've gone through Ackman's career, the highs, the lows, the controversies, even gotten a glimpse into his personal life, but we're left with more questions than answers, really.
Right. Is he a brilliant investor who just can't help but stir the pot? Or is there something more to it, like he truly believes he's making the world a better place, one controversial decision at a time? I don't know. What do you think?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think that's the perfect note to end on. What do you think about Bill Ackman? We've just scratched the surface here, so dive into that Wikipedia article, explore his investments, and let us know.
And that's it for today's deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating figure and, who knows, maybe even more questions than answers. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.